Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the marketplace. Coming up, inflation falls significantly to 26.4% in November 2023 from 35.2% in October.
Year-on-year inflation for the month of November 2023 stood at 26.4%. This 26.4% signifies an 8.8 percentage point drop relative to the rate of inflation that was recorded for October 2023.
Also coming up, China raises concerns about the proposed terms on restructuring of loans granted Ghana. And the enforcement team of Ghana Revenue Authority is back on the field with a special compliance and enforcement exercise.
They don't issue the VAT invoice. They do highly selective issuance of tax invoice. Even then, it's a problem. So revenue is highly at risk.
My name is Daryl. Kwaw. Thanks for being with us. Details coming up. Inflation fell significantly to 26.4% in November 2023 from 35.2% in October. According to figures from the Ghana Statistical Service, food inflation was the major contributor to the decline in the rate of inflation. Food inflation dropped by 12.6% to 32.2% in November 2023. Here's government statistician Professor Samuel Koblini.
The consumer price index stood at 198.2 relative to 156.8 that was recorded for the same time in November 2022. Consumer price index for the month of November 2023 stood at 198.2 relative to 156.8. Given these two indices for November 2022 and November 2023, year-on-year inflation for the month of November 2023 stood at 26.4. Year-on-year inflation for the month of November 2023 stood at 26.4%. This 26.4% signifies an 8.8 percentage point drop relative to the rate of inflation that was recorded for October 2023. In October 2023, rate of inflation stood at 35.2, and given the rate of inflation for November 2023, 26.4, we have seen an 8.8 percentage point difference between the year-on-year inflation for October 2023 and November 2023. This literally means that between the months of November 2022 and November 2023, general prices of goods and services went up by 26.4%. Between the months of November 2022 and November 2023, prices of goods and services went up by 26.4%. Month-on-month inflation, that is between October 2023 and November 2023, stood at 1.5%, signifying a 0.9 percentage point increase relative to the rate that was recorded in October 2023. In October 2023, we saw a decline from 1.9% to 0.6%. This decline that we saw from September to October 2023 has been reversed by a 0.9 percentage point increase between October 2023 and November 2023. From a trend perspective, we analyze the year-on-year inflation for November 2023 over a 13-month period, that is November 2022 to November 2023, and same is done for monthly inflation on a trend perspective for the 22-month period, that is November 2022 to November 2023. Since November 2022, we've seen the sharpest decline in year-on-year inflation over the 13-month period, with the sharpest decline recording a change of 8.8 percentage points between October 2023 and November 2023. For the fourth time in a row, we continue to see a decline in year-on-year inflation. Inflation started slowing down from July 2023. It slowed down to 40.1%, further slowed down to 38.1% and 35.2% for the month of September and October 2023 respectively. And for the month of November 2023, we've seen the steepest drop over the 13-month period.
All right, join us to make sense of these latest numbers. Research lead at GCB Capital, Courage Buti. Good afternoon to you. So that's quite a significant reduction of close to 9%. Your assessment of these latest numbers and what we should make of it?
Well, good afternoon to your listeners. Yes, significant drop, but not a surprise. I think it's been predicted severally by different analysts that we're going to say this is largely due to base drift. Remember, I think we recorded the sharpest increases in inflation in the month of November and December 2022. By way of how CPI is computed, you would have that base effect, the sharp increases in the base that time, having a major impact on the outturn this time round. So yes, there has been a lot of factors underpinning the decline in inflation, but for this particular print, it was mostly about the impact of the favorable base drift that has brought it to where it is. 26.4 is a sharp decline, but at that level, we are still quite a distance from the target band, really. And so it's a good development. It has implications that cut across the economy, really. And it gives now Bank of Ghana the lee room to strengthen their policy stance, because they will now have what you call a positive real monetary policy rate, which is what you need to sustain this inflation, really. Because at the point when inflation was surging and monetary policy was more or less following it, they couldn't compete because it has ramifications for other sectors of the economy. But now that it is receding and below monetary policy rate, the central bank has a positive real monetary policy rate, and they could be able to sustain that stance until inflation recedes sufficiently before you see them respond with some cut in the policy rate. So positive development, but they need to be sustained going forward.
All right, we'll discuss the outlook and what some research firms are saying a bit, but what does this mean for the consumer? Because then the question comes up, how is this, or is this really reflecting on the ground? Do you think consumers, are they really seeing significant changes in prices?
Well, not really. You are not, I don't think it's anyone's expectation with inflation declining that you see prices reduce on the market. That is not a correct expectation. What it means is that the rate at which prices are increasing is slowing. So for instance, if inflation is 50%, it means that between last year and the period we are referring to, prices of the goods you buy have increased by some 50%. So if you were buying something 100 cedi, most likely after a year you get it at maybe 150 cedis thereabouts. That is what inflation at 50% means. So now that inflation is at 26%, what it really means that between November last year and this November, this just past November, prices of goods and services have increased by 26%. The rate at which it's increasing has slowed down from what we knew as 54.1% at its peak now to about 26.1%. So you wouldn't see as sharp increases in prices as previously was the case when you go to market. The increases will be more gentle now. And so if maybe something was sold for 100 cedi now, when you go to market a year hence, you may see there are 120, 126 cedis rather than increase to 150, 200 thereabout. That is what it means. So cost of living is still very high. And with every print of inflation, it means that prices of goods and services on the market are increasing. But the rate at which they are increasing is what is slowing down. It is good that way because it allows you room to plan. You know that between this period and that period, this will be your cost of living. And then you plan how to meet that, as opposed to the sharp increases where you are left practically vulnerable.
And that's a useful explanation for our audience this afternoon. Well, let's look into the near future. Research firm IC is projecting inflation could close the year at a rate of 27.3% plus or minus 1%. And also predicts that headline inflation would outperform the government's upper target of 31.4% and central target of 29.4%. Now, that seems more likely or even better, doesn't it, based on the figures that we've seen today?
Well, I hear you say 27, and that's, I think, conservative. I think the figure we've seen today, 26.4, even beats that.
Plus or minus 1.
Yes, of course, plus and minus 1. So yeah, I see inflation more or less around 24.5 25% levels by end of year or slightly lower if we do not see shocks around. And of course, I say that because we are in the Yuletide season, the Christmas period. You see a lot of demand tend to peak around these periods, and it could affect pricing and all of that. If those things do not shock to the downside, we could see inflation around 25% level by end of year, which I think, I made mention of the fact that base effect affected in November. We had similar impact in December, but not to the same extent really. So you would expect again some relatively maybe sizable decline in inflation in December, but not as much as the 8.8 we saw in November really. So it depends on the dynamics around the Yuletide. But if there are no major shocks around the Yuletide, we could see it lower than even what the IC projection is talking about.
Now you're faced with a potential delay in the disbursement of the second tranche of IMF bailout funds. Would that have any impact on inflation?
Well, I think through the exchange rate channels and through of course, the confidence it has on the economy and all of that, yes. If at this point we are recording over 20% CD depreciation, over 26+% depreciation thus far, it would have transmission to inflation. When we are recording 3, 4, 5% levels of depreciation, then the pass-through could be a bit more tame. With the external debt restructuring, if it's eventually concluded and the funds we expect are disbursed, it comes to show our reserves, one, and more or less eases concerns around the economy Ghana, and that is where we would have the leverage to probably even start to attract some flows in, even in the form of FDIs, because now that sentiments are very weak. Inflows from all sides seem to be affected, but at least we could see inflows from the FDI side if the macro story is improving, and it hinges a lot on that external debt restructuring, how it will improve sentiment, and the 600 million flow from the completion of the review, plus the many other catalytic funding that could come as a result of that, will mean that our reserve position is strengthened and the CD is a bit more stable than it is. It would also affect how inflation through the petroleum pricing could come about, because if the CD is much stable, I mean, exchange rate as a factor in there for petroleum price determination really. So its impact cuts across. It will be a positive thing to have that review completed. Fingers are just crossed that we can get the MOUs that we need from the official creditors and push it through. It may take some time, it may take some concessions, but hopefully we get it sooner than later.
Fingers crossed. Final one. I mean, you talked earlier about sustaining the downward trend. How do we do so?
Well, what has yielded this so far has been, one, fiscal discipline under program. We've seen the numbers we are running on the fiscal side way ahead of the target for the period. We've seen on the monetary side of things also a tight stance, even if not commensurate with where inflation was, it was relatively tight. We've seen also a zero deficit financing in place, all of these kind of supporting the disinflation process. Those things must be sustained. We are entering into an election year. There is a tendency to overspend to try to get a re-election. But the hope is that under program and with the tight target we have before us, there will be a bit more discipline than one would have expected, and we can sustain the kind of trajectory we are on now. If we do that and do not swell up expenditure, it would have ramifications for inflation where we could sustain the decline. Monetary authorities under that MOU are not supposed to finance the deficit. I don't see it changing anytime soon. We need to entrench that even outside program and limit any monetary intervention to carefully define extraordinary events rather than maybe occasional blips, and then we are seeing some support coming in. So it is those interventions generally that, if we anchor and sustain, should extend the disinflation process and bring us ultimately back to the target band. We are 26 now. I don't expect that in 2024 we get to the target band. Will largely be around the mid-15s in 2024. It is 2025 that we would have to get to the target band, and it required those sustained effort for us together.
All right, Courage Wuti, thank you so much. Research lead at GCB Capital. Appreciate your time with us this afternoon. Now, China has raised concerns about the proposed terms on restructuring of loans granted Ghana. This could impact on time Ghana is expected to secure the second tranche of IMF cash disbursement. George Afe has the latest.
This is one of several issues that has come up during the latest round of meetings at the official creditor committee level, co-chaired by France and China. Based on the engagement that Joy Business has had with persons with knowledge of these meetings, China is making a strong case for the proposed cuts on interest to be paid on these debts to be shared fairly. This is to ensure that the proposed debt treatment terms is the same for all the European countries that Ghana is indebted, as well as the multilateral institutions. There are also concerns about how the debt sustainability analysis was carried out, which formed the basis for the bilateral debt treatment. China has also argued that based on Ghana's improved economic position, some fresh debt sustainability analysis should be carried out. Joy Business understands that China is even carrying out its own debt sustainability analysis, which may influence any fresh proposals that could be tabled soon. All these developments earlier forced the IMF to reschedule Ghana's board meeting to some few days before the end of this year. But based on these fresh developments, could Ghana miss out on getting the second tranche of IMF cash before the end of this year? Well, time will tell. But things are now looking very difficult.
Right, Kwaw is Senior Finance Lecturer at the University of Cape Coast. He joins me on Zoom to discuss this. Great to see you. So, China raising a number of concerns based on this report. Your thoughts first on the case China is making for proposed cuts on interest to be shared fairly and debt treatment terms to be same for all creditor countries.
Thank you very much. You will notice that when we started the domestic debt exchange, the terms were different. The terms were different for institutions. They were different from pensioner bondholders and individual bondholders. When we raised the issue, it actually came up that there is the need for us to ensure that there is a fair playing ground for all the persons who are involved in this debt exchange.
Okay, appears Kwaw is frozen there. We'll try and re-establish connection with him. Hopefully we can to continue with this discussion on the story about China raising concerns about debt restructuring. We know that we are racing against time to get the second tranche of IMF cash disbursement. You're watching The Marketplace. We'll take a short break. We'll come back with some more stories. Stay with us.
Joy Business understands that China is even carrying out
Welcome back to The Marketplace. Back to a story about China raising concerns about proposed terms for debt restructuring for Ghana. Kwaw is on Zoom with us. So you're making a point. I mean, we're talking about China essentially asking for a fair sharing of the proposed interest cuts.
Yeah, so as I was saying, we need a fair playing ground for all external creditors. So there should not be differentiation between the creditor 1 and creditor 2 because they've all borrowed to the country and each.
All right, unfortunately, it doesn't appear that we have a good connection today to Kwaw. We'll continue that conversation at another time. But to another story we're following for you this afternoon,
so
the enforcement team of the GRA authority, the Ghana Revenue Authority, is back on the field with a special compliance and enforcement exercise. This follows failure of some shop owners and businesses to honor their VAT obligations, despite several warnings from the authority. Here's more in this report.
The special enforcement exercise was carried out at the Accra South area, where popular merchandise and wholesale shop Oforimati Enterprises was closed down and owner arrested for selective issuance of value-added tax invoice. K-Cran, dealers in iron rods on the Spintex Road were also picked up by the team for not registering for the VAT invoice. Head of the Accra South Area Enforcement and Compliance Team, John Yabuabin, has been speaking to journalists after the exercise.
In the first place, by the brisk nature of the activities, they should have own computer-generated invoice where they are using the cash till. They are not using that, and they don't issue the VAT invoice. They do highly selective issuance of tax invoice. Even then, it's a problem. So revenue is highly at risk, and we had no option than to go in, take all their documents, that is the suppliers' invoices. We have also taken their own invoices. We will do the required audit. But as it stands, we are charging them under Section 58 of the VAT Act 870 for non-issuance of VAT invoice.
Yabuabin warned businesses to ensure full compliance or face the wrath of the GRA during the festive season.
We know that during this season is a peak activity season for all taxpayers, all traders. And we expect that they will comply. And as you have seen me here, this is only just one area. There are other areas which the officers would also intensify the activities, because during this season we know there are a lot of violations. So it is a warm advice, a kind advice to all taxpayers who have registered that they should issue the tax invoice, because we realize revenue is highly leaking, particularly with VAT.
The Criminal Investigation Department is expected to process the defaulting companies to court as soon as possible.
All right, and that's it for the marketplace this afternoon. There is more news on our website, myjoyonline.com/business. Let's run through the stories there for you. Inflation falls to 26.4% in November. We discussed that this afternoon. Also, external debt restructuring. China will always negotiate hard. Ghana must accept it. That's Dr. Theo Echampong. Get more on myjoyonline.com. Those stories and others there. My name is Daryl. Kwaw. Thanks for watching. We will be back same time tomorrow.